Office of School Planning will be presenting his slide deck. So look forward to it. Tim, the floor is yours. If it's okay with you, Tim, I'm going to suggest that we do questions while you're speaking to make sure that we're clear as we're going, if that's okay. If you would prefer to hold till the end, we'll defer to your request.
I am okay with questions along the way.
All right, let's go. It's all you.
Sounds good. I'm gonna, let's see, make sure I get the sharing set up. All right. So did the slides come up?
Not yet.
No slides yet.
No.
Not yet. I always struggle with this on WebEx because I don't use it very often. Let's see.
I believe you have to accept permission. I believe Lisa shared that permission with you, and then you can share your screen.
To accept permission?
Lisa, can you walk them through it? I believe that's what we need to do.
I have a share button on the bottom.
Yes, select that share button and please share your screen, not your application.
Screen, share, okay.
And then open up your presentation.
There's a box on the bottom that says show my WebEx app. Leave that alone. Leave it checked.
Sure. Oh, there it is.
Good.
There we go.
Yep, you're up. You're
Okay.
good.
This button and turn it into a presentation. There we go. Great. All right. Sorry for the hiccup getting started there. Thanks for having me out this evening to speak to the group. My name is Tim Rogers, Manager of School Planning for Howard County Public School System. My boss Dan is on the committee. Dan Lubley, Executive Director. So we're well represented here this evening. I was asked to come this evening to present some information on our enrollment projection process, development of the APFO chart and the feasibility study, to inform your review of the APFO ordinance. And I'll take a few minutes to walk through the steps and the data sources for our enrollment projection process, then talk about the feasibility study, and then the school capacity chart that we provide to DPZ each year following the annual process that we're about to walk through. The capital planning process takes about 18 months from start to finish. It begins in January to February of the first year with the new enrollment projections and ends with the school capacity chart being adopted by the board in early summer of the second year. In between, we utilize the updated enrollment projection to perform an analysis of school capacity utilization and applicable strategies to address crowding that we've seen or are expecting. That report informs the capital budget process, which moves from staff development to superintendent's proposal and the Board of Education requested, which is then delivered to the County Council in spring. School capacities and future capacity or capital projects that are in that final council and board approved budget are then used in the development of the school capacity chart sent to DPZ for adoption by the County Council in the summer. As this annual process concludes, we will have already begun the next annual process, presenting the projection and feasibility study to the board as the previous process concludes. And this is where there's typically a little bit of confusion as we're in that June, kind of May to June to July timeframe where we're coming to the board with new things for the new annual process while they're finishing up the previous annual process with the capital budget being approved. The foundation of our enrollment projection is cohort survival or grade progression ratios. This is the ratio at which one grade or group of students progresses to the next. This is an industry standard methodology, and some school systems rely solely on this calculation to estimate future enrollment. In our process, these grade progression rates only include students staying in their current school from year to year. We supplement that with live birth counts to inform kindergarten estimates, student yields from apartment turnover, resale of existing homes and new construction, and students attending out-of-district schools. These data points fit together into a somewhat linear process. Each year, for each school, we begin the projection with prior year's official Maryland State Department of Education reported enrollment for each grade. We then examine each of these factors, referencing historical averages for each. To start with, students are advanced 1 grade according to those grade progression rates, and birth counts from 1 year prior are referenced to estimate the number of incoming kindergartners. Then historic student yield rates specific to each school's attendance area are used to estimate the impacts of new arrivals from apartment turnover, resale of existing homes, and new construction. Specific yield rates for single-family detached, single-family attached, and multifamily in each school attendance area are used in this calculation as long as there's an adequate sample from new development within the last 5 years. When there's not data within the last 5 years that we can reference, we just go ahead and use a county-wide average. Then, since some students attend schools other than the one to which they are assigned due to regional programming or other exceptions, we factor that in to arrive at an enrollment projection for the next 10 years. Slightly different view of the process. This version just adds a little bit more detail. And of note here is that there's a slight difference for middle and high school, noting that we don't have kindergarten in high school, so we're not, or middle and high school, so we're not looking at the births from 5 years prior. We're simply progressing those grades forward, and the 5th grade for the middle school up to the next level. Same with the 8th to 9th grade to inform the incoming cohort. And then this view even has even more detail. This graphic includes a little more detail on each factor and the calculation utilized for each. We've published this before as an attachment to a feasibility study. The yellow boxes represent the 2 non-housing related population calculations, estimating kindergarten from births 5 years prior and the grade progression rates. Then the 4 housing related steps, estimating the impacts of housing transactions on future enrollment, are in the blue boxes. And then the final out-of-district adjustment shows up in the orange box in this graphic. It's tough to lay out all the information on one slide, so we've progressed kind of through this from a simplified view to a more detailed view. And I'll note here that I've added a couple slides since I provided the document to Lisa. So as soon as we're done here, I'll send this to Lisa so she can update the resources that are provided. I think this is one of those slides that I added in. So then we
Tim,
move on.
real quick. I'm sorry, Tim. Real quick on the birth data that you use to project your kindergartens.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do that by polygon, or is it just countywide and you allocate it pari passu?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Historically, we have used births aggregated by elementary school boundary. And we've worked closely with the Vital Statistics Office to be able to use GIS to aggregate those counts. In recent years, though, I think they've had some data privacy issues, not from us, but from other users of their data, and they've kind of locked that down. So what we've been doing more recently is more along the lines of the second thing you suggested. So we still have the school level aggregate counts for this year and next year, but then when we're looking at births, so what I mean is for 5 years ago for this year's projection and 5 years prior for next year's projection. And what we've done to fill in the years after those two is to use countywide level data from the CDC. That's the only place we've been able to find more recent counts. And we've just used the historical distribution of births amongst the school's elementary schools to distribute those countywide totals. We're still working with Vital Statistics and the local health department to see if there's any new avenues we can pursue to get that school level birth count data again. But it's definitely going to be a challenge for us going forward, and to be honest, may impact our kindergarten accuracy, but I hope it won't.
So I have
And go ahead, Lisa.
sorry, would now be a good time to ask a source question for one of the boxes on here, or are you gonna get into
Sure.
that more? I don't know, I should wait.
No, now's a great time.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So the 2 boxes that say resale of existing homes and then new construction, I had spoken to you a while back Manager Rogers, and what was really informative in the past was, and I was curious if this is something that is being done the same way as I understood it in previous years, was that new construction is defined as occupancy permits in the last, I guess, 10 months to a year or something like that. Is that still the case? Like you define the new students each year, right? And then within that number of new students, you're saying, okay, this is how many new students came from occupancy permits in the past, whatever amount of time under a year. And that is done each year. And so for instance, if someone was new to the school in that bin, right, new student, came from a house that was 2 years old, then they would not be in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Basically, for all of these housing factors, we're using a 5-year history, and we go through this process of processing the student data, the official September 30th student data, and tagging each new arrival based on the housing factor that they're connected to. So, we can match student addresses to records in the sales database from the Maryland Department of Planning. And if we do make that match, then we tag that new student as a new arrival to their school as a result of a sale. In the new construction, it's building permits and not sales.
right, okay,
And we're only looking, and since it's building permits, we're just looking at permit data set from the 12 months prior to September 30th of each year.
understood. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So a little bit on the results of the projection. These two charts help illustrate what we've seen recently in student enrollment. The upper chart shows the official enrollment in the red line and the year one projection for each year in the blue through the 23-24 school year. The immediate impacts of the pandemic can be seen where the two lines diverge for school year 2020-2021. For the following year, we adjusted enrollment to account for an expected rebound, but it continued declining. So we adjusted for 22-23, and we're within 400 students that year, then within about 550 for school year 23-24. The lower chart shows the actual enrollment with a gray line. So that's the observed enrollment from 2007 through 2023. And then the colored lines shooting off the end of that gray line indicate the last 6 enrollment projections, with the blue and pink lines being the older 2019 and 2020 pre-pandemic projections. I've tried to say pandemic and projection in the same sentence too many times. So the observation of note here is that those two lines more or less continue the trend that we saw prior to the pandemic. And then in the years following 2021, 2022, the orange and yellow, we started adjusting downward, noting that we started to build that history of more of a flat trajectory for the projection as opposed to continued growth like we saw prior. And then the purplish line and the green line indicating the last two projections, the green line being the projection that we just presented to the board in the projection report in April of this year, showing that based on the historical data that we're now using post-pandemic, we're expecting little to no, and in some years maybe even declining enrollment going forward.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
I don't see any of these slides in the notebook. Are these slides going to be uploaded into the notebook? Because I don't see any of them in
Yeah.
there.
Well,
These are
some are, and I admitted just a minute ago, I did add a couple as I was
I heard
reviewing
that,
for
but
today.
I don't see any of them so far.
Oh,
Like
okay.
I don't see any of your slides because I'm trying to follow along in the notebook
sure.
at the same time, and I don't see any
Laura-
of your slides in there at all.
Oh.
Laura,
So
that-
you're going to see this
they
one
actually-
on, you're going to see this one on page number 14 and binder in section number 3. It's at the top of that section. The lower chart is
So,
on page 14,
when I'm
but
looking
the
at
other
the
ones are not
binder,
there.
right after the ABPO committee meeting agenda, the next thing, it goes right into Jeff's presentation. There's nothing here about
If you,
Tim's.
if you go past Jeff's, Jeff has all of his slides and then their actual report.
I did.
Tim's are behind the actual report that Jeff has provided.
And what page was that?
Well, if you go, well, the pages don't track, so it's a little difficult. But
Right.
when you download the slides for tonight, if you go past Jeff's presentation and then past Jeff's report, that's when Tim's slides start.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. So, okay, well, someone will go in there and make sure all the slides are accurate then, because I don't see what you're seeing, and I've gone through this thing like 4 or 5 times now.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll keep going. Thanks.
Sure.
So
And
Tim, just
yes.
for validation, and I know I've asked this
Right.
before, but on the record, I am very concerned. You make great estimates based on the information you have available and past history, but there's information you don't have available, such as how many new units will be missing middle under new zoning or gateway, and just correct me, those aren't reflected in here, so they may potentially influence this at some point in the future.
That's correct. There's nothing from Gateway is in here because the master plan for it is still being, I don't know what, I could be misspeaking, but I think
It's
it's still
fair.
in development, right?
It would be unfair for you to have to do it, but it's something we need to be aware of, that
Yeah.
it could be higher based on
Right.
the outcome of that.
And
And
Gateway doesn't have numbers yet, as for what the build will, what any builds would be. So it would be pretty difficult to make those kind of projections, to even spitball those
sure.
at this point.
and secondly, granted, you're from Howard County Public School System, so you're reporting your numbers, but there also are students going to private and homeschool that aren't reflected on this, and
That's right.
those, how can I say, are increasing currently despite COVID, probably because of COVID.
Yeah, you're right, Brent. They are. We historically had captured somewhere between 94 and 96% of the estimated school age population with the public school system, and last time I looked at it, we were around 92%. So there's a growing number of non-public school age children within the county, and that's a factor.
Tim, one of the things that I noticed, I think maybe it came out of Jeff's slides, but it looked like there might be some rebound in capturing incoming elementary school students post-COVID, as opposed to recapturing students that left as a result of COVID and went to either homeschooling or private schools. Is that correct, or am I misreading that?
So we didn't really observe a rebound in overall enrollment. I can't speak to whether the individuals who withdrew during the pandemic for homeschooling or private school, whether those specific individual students came back. But in terms of overall enrollment, we didn't really see a rebound. We went down. Yeah, we dropped because of those withdrawals and other factors, and then we basically stayed at that level.
What I'm wondering is if we historically captured 94 to 96,
and
now we're only capturing 92, I'm going back to wondering if we're going back to 94 to 96 on the incoming elementary school students.
Yeah.
Where the private school losses are lost because they're established in their new schools and their new relationships, but new students are coming in back at that 94 to 96 rate. I don't know if I'm interpreting that correctly or not, but.
Well, I would think we would see some overall enrollment increase if that were the case. It might be slow at first, but if there's a similar number of school-aged population
Births.
and we're getting a higher percentage of that over the now versus the last 2 or 3 years, I would expect we'd see enrollment ticking up, and we're just not. In fact, this year we have Enrollment's not official yet, but just looking at some early preliminary numbers, it looks like we've over projected by a couple hundred again. So in fact, we're not seeing even what we projected following this green trend that's shown on the slide.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question. So, having several friends and my daughter and I looking into it ourselves, what we found out from a lot of the local private schools is that actually the private school enrollment goes up in high school because a lot of people put their kids in private school when they get to the high school age. So actually their enrollment is lower in the elementary and middle school and highest in the high school. So, it seems like people are, leaving the public school system and going to the private school system when their kids, start high school in this area. And are we tracking that in any way?
Well, we do typically have, we've observed for years a lower cohort survival rate between 8th and 9th grade. So when you compare that to the other high school cohort survival rates, there's a noticeable difference and a lower rate for 8th to 9th grade survival. So yep, that's something we've seen. Good question though. Moving on to projection accuracy. So we had typically presented this information to the board in February. This year, we took an additional step to change the schedule a little bit and presented this with our new projection to the board in a new report in April. So previously we had done a projection accuracy report in February and then the feasibility study in June. This year we postponed the projection accuracy report until April, presented it with the new projection in April, and then the feasibility study in June still happened. It just didn't include as much projection information. So just a timing note. But on April, like I said, in April this year, we presented this to the board, the projection accuracy report, outlining what we're seeing in our data that's used in the projection, as well as the accuracy of the previous year's projection. Quick review shows that the 22 and 23 projections returning to the kinds of error rates observed prior to the pandemic at all three levels, as well as in the countywide enrollment. The by-school mean absolute percent error for the 5 years prior to the pandemic was 2.9%, following average rates around 5% for 2020 and 2021. We have seen a 3.3% mean absolute percent error rate in 22 and 3.1% in the 2023 projection. So nearly returning to the pre-pandemic levels. And again, that last measure is by school mean absolute percent error. So it negates the positives and negatives and just shows the absolute percentage and the mean of those absolute percentages. And then moving on to pre-K. Pre-K enrollment and space planning is managed by program coordinators in consultation with the Office of School Planning. Since pre-K programs are not mandatory, have income qualification, and enrollment is not tied to attendance areas, pre-K capacity and space is reviewed and adjusted on an annual basis. Additionally, some pre-K programs have unique staffing requirements, and some are co-taught, adding complexity to the number of students possible in each classroom. Due to these unique characteristics, pre-K enrollment and space needs are planned outside of the annual K-12 process. The blueprint legislation requires HCPSS to provide pre-K services for students that meet certain income eligibility criteria and who elect to enroll. Most school systems in the state are taking a year-by-year approach to estimating pre-K enrollment and planning for needed space. In the 2024 projection report, we took it a step forward and developed some general estimates of total eligible population at each school in the first two eligibility tiers. We consider this a geographic eligibility estimate, not an annual enrollment projection. And this number is based on several assumptions to fill in the gaps in available data for this population and is more suitable for long-range planning than as a near-term enrollment projection. We plan to continue working to refine these numbers in support of the blueprint implementation and continue working with the program coordinators to make sure that we have space available and plan for future available space as needs arise. And I just wanted to call out on this slide, the total estimate here is showing as almost 3,300 students. Another part of the blueprint is that private providers are to provide capacity and seats for 50% of the need. So if you take that into account, we're not too far off after we complete converting all of our half-day seats over to full-day seats. So this was another step that we took to try to get a little bit better handle on what to look forward to in terms of blueprint implementation. School capacities. So this leads us into a discussion around school capacity calculations. HCPSS uses our own board-approved formulas that are based on recommendations from consultants and industry best practices. The focus for each level is to assign an appropriate capacity to every room that's used as a classroom. This includes rooms for K through 12 general instruction, related arts at the middle school level, and most uses at the high school level. The floor plan that's shown on the screen outlines the classrooms for this particular school that were counted for capacity in blue. You can see that those are all of the kindergarten through first grade or kindergarten through fifth grade classrooms, with a couple of additional classrooms added in that are used for GT or other uses, but still meet the space constraint and the use requirements to count towards that capacity. For this school, that resulted in a count of 30 classrooms. That was a capacity of 672 students. Going forward on a year-to-year basis, what we do is examine the programs and when programming changes at a school due to increases in special ed or pre-K use. Since those rooms are not counted towards capacity, we examine that school and recalculate according to that board-approved formula to determine if we need to reduce or, in some cases, increase the capacity due to those programmatic changes. So updates happen as needed, but we don't go through the whole school system and every school and every classroom every year. Another note on this slide, the questions that always arise around the state-rated capacity. We don't use the state-rated capacity for our day-to-day and year-to-year planning purposes. It comes into play when projects advance to the point where we're seeking state funding for a capacity-related project, and the state then uses their capacity number to determine eligibility for funding and how much they'll participate.
And Tim, this comes up a lot in the PTA world, state rated versus county rated. And obviously, if you have two plans, one may benefit you and your goal and one will not. And that's usually the comparison. Mm-hmm. But how frequently do the county rated capacity considerations change? Is it a very static, stable measure of capacity, or is it frequently changing or being modified?
Well, the formulas were all adopted around 10 years ago, and they've been the same for that entire time. The capacity, the school capacity ratings themselves, I would say each year we're reviewing between 6 and 10 schools to make adjustments due to programmatic changes.
And these, as you know, clearly trickle down to the APFO charts. So it's something very closely monitored by everyone. So thank you for that verification.
And we publish the changes in the feasibility study each year. And then also in the feasibility study, there's a pretty robust description of our methodology as well as the state's methodology for state rated capacities. So if anyone wanted to dive into that, there's a resource to tap into. So then we look at the feasibility study. The feasibility study is a comprehensive review of the 10-year enrollment projections for the school system. It's an annual planning document that is involved in each cycle of the capital budget process, more or less begins the capital budget planning process. It provides a new enrollment projection, proposes adjustments and additions to the capital improvement program and the long-range master plan, considers strategies to adjust enrollment growth or decline for the school system, and follows the guidance of policy 6010 school attendance areas. If redistricting is proposed, you may see also redistricting plan options presented in the study. As I said before, the projections presented in the projection report or in previous years, the feasibility study, are informed by updated data processed by the Office of School Planning. Projections focus on kindergarten through 12th grade. And the Office of School Planning is continuing the discussion with the offices of early childhood to fine tune and make advancements on our pre-K planning process. So I just wanted to bring this one in because it shows that the feasibility study is not just for capacity planning and long-range planning, but also informs some decisions and some planning in the operating budget as well. In this past year's feasibility study, a key recommendation every year and this past year is the strategies to adjust high capacity utilization. Specifically, we're looking for schools expected to exceed the board's target utilization range of 90 to 100%, or expected to exceed the board's threshold for considering redistricting of 110%. The report recommends a strategy to address each of those situations, and in summary, portables, redistricting, and the use of planned and future capital projects are the strategies recommended. We often also recommend adjustments to the timing and extent of capacity adding capital projects based on these identified capacity needs. For instance, the approved FY25 capital budget includes an addition at Centennial High School in 2036. But it's not included in our recommendation from this year's feasibility study because it doesn't address a capacity need. The information on this slide was presented to the board in June of 24 and will be used in the consideration of capital needs for the FY26 capital budget process, which began this summer and will conclude in May of 25. And I just want to additionally stress that when we're talking about the capital budget planning process, this feeds into the capacity related criteria in terms of considering capital budget projects, but there are other criteria that go into that equation as well related to facility condition. So just because a project doesn't show up in our capacity recommendation doesn't mean there aren't other criteria for which it will be considered against that may place it in consideration for funding in a future capital budget. But in the graphic to the right of this slide, it's my right, I hope it's yours as well, the flowchart graphic. There's three projects that we kind of held in place: the Faulkner Ridge Pre-K project, the Oakland Mills project, middle school that is, and the Dunlogan Middle School project. They already had received funding or will receive funding in the FY25 budget, so we didn't want to recommend any changes to those. But following that, you'll see that we've recommended a new elementary school, number 43 in the southeast, Murray Hill Middle School renovation and addition, Worthington Elementary School addition, and a new 44th Elementary School in the Northwest. And again, these are in response to the capacity needs that we're seeing in the projection and have no bearing on and no consideration of facility condition, because that's a different part of the process that my office is less involved in.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Tim?
sure.
When capacity numbers change, for example, my children's school capacity number changed by about 100 kids, how is that factored into the need for putting them on the capital budget, the building ability to accommodate that different capacity? Because obviously that now changes a number for a school and makes them either significantly over, under. So if you're saying that schools are evaluated over, you said it just before that every so often you're evaluating schools for their capacity based on the previous slide. How then does that change what is needed for the building and how to accommodate those numbers?
Right. So that new capacity number is the rating for the number of students that are the building is suitable to support. And so when When the capacity rating for a school goes down, like in this case, that's indicating that this building, because of this formula and the programs that are present there, this building can support fewer students than previously calculated. And that may change where they fall in the 90 to 100 with regard to the 90 to 100% target range, and even 110% redistricting consideration threshold by policy. So yeah, when that changes, that shows up in our numbers, and we're looking at what the best strategy will be to address that.
So when you go back to your slide, Tim, on enrollment trend, and you look and the green line is now guiding based on post-COVID experience. But it's the two lines at the top that dictated the capital project needs that were budgeted for in 20 and 21. And those capital projects won't deliver seats until what, 25, 26? So does it significantly change what's happening now with respect to overall seats being delivered? Because we basically considerably over-delivered seats because we were using projection numbers for 25 and 26 based on pre-COVID numbers, and now we're on the green line, which is way below.
So this is a rare circumstance, hopefully. We don't typically have impacts to our projection and our enrollment trends like we saw with the pandemic. And one thing I'll note is on this slide, the Dunlogan Middle School project. In this report, we're classifying as just a renovation addition. Previously, it was expected to add 233 seats, but with this new projection trajectory, our recommendation is to adjust that seat add expectation down, because, like you said, the seats aren't needed in that area anymore. And then my other note in response to that would be, this is a recommendation from the school planning office based on what we're seeing with projection and enrollment projection trends. And then this recommendation goes through a process where we're also considering facility condition priorities. And then it goes to the superintendent for review, and public hearings take place, as well as the board for review where public hearings take place. And so there are several steps after our recommendation that may impact the final result.
So are we now delivering seats under capital budgets that were approved in 20 and 21, and we're delivering seats now in 25 and 26 that will provide excess capacity at some of those schools?
Well, the seats for Oakland Mills and Dunlogan will be delivered in 28 and 29. But yeah, you're right when you say the planning for these projects did begin when we had a different outlook for enrollment projections. And that's why we're recommending reducing the seat add at Dunlogan down from 233 to the amount of seats needed to just bring the building to the current adopted ed spec.
Hey, Tim?
Yeah.
Question. In regards to just how the seat need is calculated, this seems like it's a very exact number of seat need. There's not a plus or minus threshold that happens with that. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, you are. Mm-hmm.
It's like plus or minus 5 seats, plus or minus 10 seats of that seat need.
Sure.
Is that?
Yeah, because our projection is used for more than just planning, it's used for staffing and supplies and different operational decisions. We've always projected one number because staffing and those other operational uses, they need one number to plan for. What we're talking about in this chart is a 2033 estimated seat need. And what you're asking is it's a valid question, and it's a question we've had before. And the answer is we just project one number and acknowledge that our projection as you go forward into the future, the further you are from the point where the historical data catches up to the present, the further you are from that, the likelihood of variance goes up. Just like the spaghetti plots for the hurricanes that are getting ready to affect our region. The further out
I
you
didn't
are,
want to go into variance talk because I figured
okay.
we had enough math going on tonight.
Oh,
I was
gotcha, gotcha.
trying not to go, but I figured that there has to be some variance in that. But you tell me that from that exact number, or like at least this specific number, other things are based, so it needs that
Right.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it.
No problem.
And Tim, just one area of consideration. We talked about things like Gateway, where there's things coming down the pike that we haven't factored in. And we also look backwards in time. Have you been resource constrained? Is every seat funded every fiscal year exactly what you need so that we don't need any additional trailer capacity? Or has the budget been limited in some regard that even if we had an excess, it would be required to catch up to past deficiencies?
I feel like that's a loaded question, Brent.
It was, but necessary.
Yeah. So I think probably most, if not all, the folks in this group understand that the county grew rapidly for a period of time, and as we saw in the one of the previous slides, enrollment followed that rapid growth basically up until the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, some of the things that we were kind of seeing a little further down the road really got accelerated and put the brakes on enrollment growth. And so I think it is fair to characterize or to say that there's still some catch up that needs to happen from the previous growth that occurred around the county. Some of these things, some of these tools that we have to use for addressing overcapacity schools are rather blunt tools. Boundary adjustment or building new capacity that may take several years to actually open and plan, get funded, and open. And so, yeah, I think we do have some catch up to do, but we also are seeing that some schools that were projected to be quite overcrowded before the pandemic are now in a much better position, and some schools that some new opportunities may be opening up in terms of redistricting to take advantage of capacity that was an investment that has already occurred. So I think yes, to just generally answer your question, Brent, I think yes to that. There's still some catch up that needs to happen, and there's still some future need that's being projected that we need to address.
One thing, it's come up a couple of times, the mention of Gateway, and I think Antoine, you're involved on that committee as well. So I'd solicit your comments also, but Gateway is not going to deliver a single student for, I don't know, 5 years, 8 years. I mean, it's a long, long way away. There's not even an approved master plan for Gateway yet, let alone implementation of the master plan. So it's got a long, long way to go. And it's not that we shouldn't be thinking about it and planning for it. It's just way out there.
That's correct. Yeah. So the master plan for Gateway is currently under development, and any kind of projections for anything, for absolutely anything, are really premature at this time. In the public meeting last week, this was a question that came up about Gateway, roughly how many units, housing units are being looked at, and what kind of school facilities would be expected or estimated for that. It's really still too early in the process to know what that will be for Gateway. What is understood is that Gateway will be way more residential than it is now. It's not residential at all. And that will necessitate having some access to academic facilities, elementary, middle school, maybe high school. But like, again, nobody really knows at this point until other pieces get figured out around that puzzle.
Yeah, we don't even know what. But we don't even know the. Go ahead, Brett. I'm sorry.
Our membership counts trailers, and there's clearly a backlog of capacity that hasn't been addressed, even if you redistrict to the nth degree. And with raised class sizes and things of that nature, that's kind of obscured some of the issue. But I would say we're a long ways from saying that we have an overabundance of capacity in the school
Agree.
system.
Agree.
I wanted to just clarify something. We all could think about examples of things that are possibly under or over forecasting enrollment. But the current enrollment and capacity issues for the chart where the 105, 110, 115 trigger percentages in APFO, trigger weights in APFO are based on the current year of the actual data. And other things are triggered for future that we know can be affected plus or minus for various reasons, such as, like you said, looking at capital budget issues, looking at redistricting possibilities. But the triggers in APFO are based on each year's now as it goes forward. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Okay,
Tim,
so
we kind of hijacked you. I don't know where you
It's
are
okay.
in your slides.
I
We do have
one,
that one.
I
Yeah,
have
go
one
ahead.
more. I just have one
Yeah.
more slide. And this was a great segue from Lisa to move into this slide. At the end of all of this process, so projection through feasibility study, through development of the capital budget, and then approval of the capital budget. Once that is all complete, we provide the school capacity chart to the county that includes all of that information. And this is the elementary chart just included as a sample here. This is the chart that was provided to the board, and you can find it online on the DPZ's APFO website or webpage. The highlighted year is the test year which for this chart is 2027-28. This chart again uses the projection presented to the board in the June 23 feasibility study and any changes to capacities in the approved capital budget. Mr. Jeff already spent time in the previous meeting going through the nuts and bolts of the APFO chart, and so I won't belabor that. But again, in May of each year, we take this to the board. They approve it. They approve it for forwarding to the DPZ and the county council, and then we go ahead and do that. We do again. There's charts for middle and high school, which I think Jeff included in his presentation last week as well. And so with that, I'm through all my slides. So I'm happy. If there are other questions, I don't know where we are on time to allow Jeff time for his presentation as well. But
We're good for a couple more minutes if there are
Sure.
a couple questions left. So
absolutely, I will end my slideshow. And
anybody?
Yeah, Todd, I just wanted to let you know that I did put in the chat the page in which his presentation started on. So if you look at the PDF, it starts on PDF page 134. That helps clarify. We had a change in the order before the agenda went out, and so but we didn't change the order of the slides based on a previous agenda. So I apologize. We can make that correction, but that should start you at Tim's presentation.
And the other point was there were maybe 3 slides that were not in the slide deck that was provided. So if we can make sure that those go out, that'd be great.
Yeah, we got some slide changes at the last
Yep.
minute. So Tim, if you can send your most recent slides, I believe things were added after we had already put them in the binder. So if we can just get a whole complete package, we'll go ahead and re-upload everything then.
I will do that now.
Great, thank you.
That's great. Anybody? We're going to choke on some more numbers for another 45 minutes now. So anything else for Tim? All right. Well, Tim, thank you. Thank you for this. It's really helpful to kind of have an overview of the process. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, we'll go through Linda, I guess, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. Thank you for giving me some time this evening. Appreciate it.
All right. Next up is Jeff Brownell again. Do we need a break or we want to just go right through? Anybody go through?
Yeah,
All
go
right.
right through.
Go through.
Yep. Jeff, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Let me
All right.
share the screen.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. Let me open up this thing here. Yeah, thank you, Todd. And yeah, thank you, Tim, for that presentation. And thanks everyone for your patience as we give you another full evening of information. It's a lot. We understand that. As Linda indicated, these first few meetings are really to educate, present information, and we know it's a lot. So definitely appreciate your patience. And feel free to contact us, DPZ, or Tim and his group if you have questions. It's a lot to absorb. So the whole point of this is to try to get everybody familiar with the way things work. So regarding today's presentation, so it's a pupil yield analysis that we're putting together, that we put together. Let me move this out of the way here. And so one way to think of this is trying to see what I'm looking at here. Here we go. So Tim really presented the projections. You know, how does Howard County Public School System project data? What this did is look at an analysis of historical data to look for trends. And the main purpose was to address the HOCO by Design Policy MG1, Action E1, which is what Mary Kendall last week referred to in her presentation on HOCO by Design. There's a particular section in HOCO by Design that talks about the APFO committee and the types of things that the APFO committee is requested to look at. And let me just read that MG1 really quickly to remind you all. So it's basically to collect data for school demands in the county, sufficient to evaluate existing conditions, emerging trends, and future year needs. This analysis should include an evaluation of the life cycle of new and existing neighborhoods to better understand student growth. So that's really kind of, this is what we put together with this analysis. We received information from the Howard County Public School System student data for the last 10 years, 2013 to 2023, and combined it with our land use data, property assessment data, and housing survey data to gather further details about student yield trends. How are trends changing? What are trends per housing type? What are trends per assessed value and things of that nature? And so I'll be presenting all that information tonight. And then, as mentioned, there was a report that's included that includes all of these slides that you're going to be looking at today. And it also provides some language explanation of or interpretation of the information presented. So here's the main things we looked at. We looked at enrollment trends over time, including by planning area and school type and housing unit type. Student yield trends over time, including by planning area, school type, and housing unit type. And then we did a deeper dive into multifamily yields by apartment style. So garden apartments versus mid-rise and high-rise apartments, by bedrooms, by year built, and by monthly rents. And we got that information from the Housing Commission. Every year does a housing survey on multifamily. And it covers about 80% of all the apartments in Howard County. And the latest survey that we used was from 2021. And the value of that is that we're able to get things like bedrooms per unit and rents and the style of the apartment. That kind of information typically isn't in the state tax data. So it's really good to be able to combine the student data with that information to provide some trends and insights about what's happening with multifamily yields and what has happened over the last 10 years or so. And then we also looked at single family detached and single family attached yields of townhouses by year built, by planning area, and assessed value, and last year sold, to look at the life cycle of students in housing. So first, to cover enrollment trends, as Tim mentioned, enrollment has been increasing since 2013, but then post-pandemic it decreased. And so it's remained relatively flat, maybe increased a little bit. And right now in 2023, And I think Tim mentioned the 2024, the September 30th, 2024 numbers are going to come out soon. But in 2023, it's about the level of enrollment that was pre-pandemic in 2019, 57,535 in 2023 versus 57,531 in 2019. So we see that kind of upward trend and then this recent downward trend. This is the enrollment by planning area, and it really follows population. So Columbia is the most populous planning area, so it has the greatest number of students. This is as of 2023, followed by Ellicott City, and then Elkridge, the southeast, and the rural west. What this looks like, and I think, Todd, this might get your question. You would refer to this, I believe. So this looks at the same enrollment trends, but it's by school type. So elementary schools have the greatest number of students, which makes sense because they have pre-K through 5. They have a total of 7 grades. Middle school is the second greatest. They have the 3 grades, 6, 7, 8, and then high school has 4 grades, 9 through 12. And so you can see the enrollment over time, and it looks like elementary schools took a little bit bigger dip than at post-COVID than middle and high schools, and it's increasing a little bit quicker too. But the overall trend is all school levels went down a bit. High school actually looks like it's relatively flat. And this is students by school type and by planning area. And so you can see here that Columbia has the most, followed by Ellicott City, and then you can see the school types within each of the planning areas as well. Again, this is total enrollment in 2023. So 45% of all students are elementary students in 2023, 23% are middle, and 32% are high school. And this is the same projection or the same trend data for total enrollment, but it's by unit type. So single-family detached units have the most students, followed by single-family attached or townhouses, followed by apartment units. And then mobile homes are a very small number at the very top. And this is just kind of a summary of what I just mentioned there. So it shows 3 years, snapshot, 2023, 2018, and 2023. And this shows the total, actually this is total units in Howard County. So over that 10 years, more units have been built over time. And so on the right, it indicates that 10-year growth, how many units have been built by each type of unit. So for example, from 2013 to 2023, there were about 4,000 new single-family detached units built, from 58,000 back in 2013 to 62,400 in 2023. That's about a 7% increase. Townhomes increased by 3,800 units, representing a 17% increase. And apartment units increased by 5,500, which is the greatest percentage increase. And that trend is going to continue. We're going to be building more apartments and less single family and townhomes as the land use runs out, as I mentioned during, I think, the last presentation. So right now there's about 119,000 housing units in the county, and 62,000 of them are single family detached, 28,900 apartments, and 26,700 townhouses. And what this shows is the share of students and units by dwelling unit type. The chart on the left is for 2013, and the chart on the right is for 2023. And so you can see the pre-K through 12 students, 65% of those students were living in single family detached. And about 55% of the dwelling units were single family detached in 2013. And only 14% of students were living in apartment units in 2013, and about 15% in 2023. So you can see the range and the impact the new units are having in the county as it's built over time. So that's the overall enrollment. Now, if you look at the student yields, which is basically the chart on the right.
Hey, Jeff.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I to back you up one second. Between your two your enrollment trends slide that talks about housing units by dwelling type, where you have 2013, 105,941, 2023, 119,367. That translates into a percentage growth of what, 15%, give or take?
So say that again, Todd. I'm sorry. 100.
If we went from 105,941 to 119,367 on your slide in that 10 years,
Right.
that translates into what, like a 15% round number increase? Maybe a little
Probably
less,
something
actually.
like that. It's probably, like it's
13.
yeah, something around there.
So if we did the same percentage change on school enrollment from 2013 to 2023, does school enrollment go up by 13 or more or less?
There was a slide at my last presentation where I compared the population increase to student enrollment increase, and the population increase was greater than the student enrollment increase.
Okay.
So I would imagine the same trend would occur with the homes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple calculation because you have all the data right here. What I'm wondering is if we're already seeing the trend toward a fewer number of students per dwelling unit in 2023 in the aggregate as compared to the number of students per dwelling unit in 2013, which obviously is going to accelerate as we do even a higher percentage of multifamily going forward.
Right. Yes. So we are seeing that trend. In fact, the next section of this presentation shows that.
All right, go. I'm sorry.
So the first part was really looking at units and total aggregate students. And so the next part sort of divides the two to come up with the yields. But yes, so you interpreted what you saw leading into the next section here. And that's this chart here. So this is the yield. And so you can see the yields.
Hey, Jeff, there's 2 slides you're skipping. You went from enrollment trends down to student yields, but there's 2 more slides in the presentation that I don't see you talking about.
Right. So I took some slides out of because it just seemed like it was a lot of information.
Okay. So you're not going to go over slide 12 and 13.
Yeah, 12 or 13, because they're sort of, it's sort of the same information, just counts in a different way.
Okay.
Okay. So I think I took out a total of 4 slides.
For what it's worth, just what is included in your package is his complete report, not just these summary slides. So there's a lot of data in the complete report as well.
Right.
Yes. I'm just trying to follow along with him here because what's on my computer is easier to see than because I'm logged in on my phone.
Got it. Yeah, that's very perceptive, and you're right. I did take out a few slides trying to sort of make it more digestible. And there's even more slides in the report. But again, I'm trying to highlight things here. And the additional slides are the same kind of information by planning area and that kind of thing, if you want to get back into the details of it. So this is the yields. So the chart on the right is the total units built in the county, housing units, starting in 2013, increasing to 2023. So over time, there's about 15,000 units, 14,000 units built in the county over that 10-year time period. And then you compare that to the total students in the Howard County Public School System over time. You divide the two and you get the yield. So
hey, Jeff, this is a really important slide because it looks at the county holistically. But I just want to verify, this also includes things like over 55 units, which naturally wouldn't produce children. And it doesn't include things like private and public students coming out.
That's correct. Yes. So that's a good point. So there is a fair amount of age restricted housing where students don't live. And there's a note down here that says it includes pre-K through 12. So this does include pre-K, but does not include age restricted housing. So the age restricted housing is not included in these numbers, Brent.
Okay.
So it's only housing where, what's that?
That is a factor. And this particular chart currently is one of the main metrics in calculating mitigation. So it's pretty critical that people see it and recognize it.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So good to point that out. Thank you. And your other point, what was your other point? You said something else that I thought was,
Whether or not we're factoring in, this is just a student versus houses, but student just in Howard County school system, not
right.
our privately educated or homeschooled children.
That's correct. So these are only children attending Howard County Public Schools, correct?
Thank you.
So can I ask you a question, Jeff? So if this doesn't include age restricted housing, then the number on the top line in theory would be considerably larger than it is because it doesn't include age restricted housing. Is that correct?
Right. That's correct.
So that makes the ratio even lower because your top line went up by about 13%, but your midline went up by about 5.5%.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, you could certainly include age restricted housing if you wanted to, and then you're basically going to get the yield for all housing in the county. But for this particular chart, it's only reflecting non-age restricted housing in the county. That's correct, yeah. And it's not, it's a good question. I don't think this number wouldn't go up considerably. I don't recall offhand how many built age restricted housing units we have in the county. But it's, it's not like it's 10,000 housing units. It's less than that, right? It's not a lot of housing relative to the non-age restricted housing stock in the county.
And Jeff, I'm going to bring up a third factor in here.
Okay.
Let's assume we pass a full-blown accessory dwelling unit legislation. Would you be considering an accessory dwelling unit an individual separate unit in these calculations, or would you be pairing it with the parent home in the equation here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think we haven't decided how to do that yet since we don't have that adopted. So I think it would really depend on the definition of what ends up being accessory dwelling. More than likely, it would be sort of an apartment unit type because there would generally be smaller units. But again, it depends on the type of housing that would be built. I mean, one way to do it, we would probably make sense just to treat it as its own sort of housing type, right? To be able to track if any students are coming in, and to the extent how many students are coming from that kind of housing. But given that that's a future endeavor, it's not included in our current calculations. We don't have a way to track it at this point since we don't have it in the county.
Yeah, it's complex math, but depending how it's implemented would really affect mitigation calculations because it's based on square foot divided by this chart right here. So
right. And then of course the other big question is to what extent, like how much of that would actually be built in the county, right? Depending on where it would be allowed, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of variables involved for sure.
thank you.
And if you look at the yields, and this is all school types, elementary, middle, and high. In 2013, it was 0.487, and it went up to about 0.5, and then it dropped post pandemic, and it stayed about the same, about 0.482. So that the yields have decreased. And that makes sense, given what Tim was indicating about evidence of more students going to private schools and that sort of thing. So the yields per house have decreased in recent times. This is the same chart, but it's by school type this time. So apartments are down in the blue. They have the smallest yields, which makes sense because apartment units are smaller. They're 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom apartments, but there's a lot of 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom apartments out there. So they have less bedrooms for less students. Townhomes are bigger, have greater yields, and single family detached are even larger. The interesting trend to note, however, is that the difference in yields between single family detached and single family attached used to be greater. Now I think townhomes are being built bigger. And the number of new single-family detached has decreased, whereas townhomes has increased. So it could be more families are moving into townhomes now, and the yields are getting closer to what they are in single-family detached at this point. But yields for apartments have decreased. I've heard something said that there's a sense that yields in apartments are increasing because the demand for families wanting to come to Howard County Public Schools for this, for their children, they're moving into apartments. And also the fact that there's less single-family detached homes and townhomes being built. There's people are moving into apartments. But if you look at the yield trends, that's just not the case. The other thing to kind of note about this, the yields are pretty consistent over the decade. It's not like they're increasing significantly or even decreasing significantly. They're pretty consistent over time. And apartments in particular have been consistent over the decade, and even decreasing to a certain degree, as you can see in this chart here.
Is there any evidence of people renting apartments as a means of establishing residency while their kids are in school?
You mean the parent, like they would just rent?
If it's if you have 3 kids and you know you're living in a low quality school system that's not in Howard County, for instance, if you get a cheap apartment and then establish residency, and you have 3 kids that can go to Howard County schools for $1,000 a month times $12,000 a year. You know, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's evidence. The children would have to live in those apartments. You can't. You have to live in Howard County to go to Howard County school system.
I know, but I will tell you that I have seen that example, and this goes back to when you were talking about renting. In the neighborhood that I'm in, they lived in Anne Arundel County, still do, and they bought a property as an investment property and they rent it out. So they don't even live there, but they own it. They're on the tax record. So they were able to register their children in the school because they're on the tax record, but they don't live there and they rent it out. And the people who rented it out also registered their kid in the school. So I think that might be something to cross-reference, because when you're a private property owner and you want to rent your house in Howard County, if you're doing it legally, you get a rental license. So maybe that's something to cross-reference, you know. It's rare, and it's not going to be anything horribly significant, but I would say, yes, it does happen. I have seen it.
Todd's concern is valid. I have a coworker that just went through a relocation, and they went through a very extensive process to establish their identity and point of residence. And I think Ms. Mallow may be able to talk to that in a little more detail. But yes, there is potential for abuse of it, but with blended families and school choice and other things of nature, with very aggressive checks of residency, it's probably not as prevalent as you think right now.
Well, the data doesn't support it, but it clearly would present an opportunity to some families that aren't satisfied with the public school options where they are and don't want to pay $30,000 a year per student to send them to privates. Anyway, I'm sorry, Jeff, I sidetracked there.
I mean, Howard County Schools has a good reputation, but the surrounding school districts also, you know, they're good school districts, but these are all anecdotal things, of course, as we know, right? And probably happen, but not to the extent that it would impact any of these trends, I would imagine. Now, this is an interesting result here. So since we're able to, you know, tie the student data to actual homes, rather than averages, you can kind of dive down a little bit and come up with these kinds of pie charts. So on the left, single family detached homes, 68.2% of all single family detached homes, not including age restricted housing, have no school children in them. 14%, 14.5 have one student living in the house, 13.1 have two, and 3.3 have percent have three students, and then a very small percentage have four or more. So the average for homes that do have students in them, an average of 1.71 students live in each of those homes. But it's important to point out that more than 2/3 of all homes in the county don't have school children in them. For townhomes, it's very similar. 67% have no children. The average of those townhomes with students is 1.65. And you can see the other numbers there as well. By the way, this is similar to what Montgomery County has too. So it's remarkable how these sort of statistics really average out over other counties as well in terms of trend lines and student yield numbers and all of that. It's pretty consistent in different jurisdictions as well. So what this shows is the average Howard County Public School student yield by school level. And as you would expect, the elementary is the highest with about 0.24 on average. And for single family detached and townhomes, they're the same. And for apartments, it's 0.15 for elementary. But they're the highest of all three unit types is the elementary, followed by high school is the next highest type at 0.18 for SFDs, 0.15 for SFAs, and 0.09 for apartments, followed by middle school at 0.12 for townhomes and SFAs, and 0.07 for apartments. And the chart on the right is the same thing by planning area. There's other charts by planning area. It doesn't really, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that when Tim does his projections moving forward, they do it by school district. We could have done that, but then the school districts changed. So we thought it best to just present the data by fixed planning areas. And if you think about the data, when you read the report, it makes a lot of intuitive sense in many ways. For example, Columbia, if you're looking at the chart on the right, the elementary yield in Columbia is the lowest of all of the areas. And that's generally because there's more apartment multifamily units in Columbia. And they're relatively high in Ellicott City and Elk Ridge, where there might be more single family detached homes, that sort of thing. So you can see the trends along planning areas by school type here. So now we did a little deeper dive looking at multifamily yields. And I think a lot of this information is new because we were able to tie it to this housing survey data that the Housing Commission conducts by looking at bedrooms and those sort of trends. So it was really sort of insightful, the information we discovered. Before I talk about that a little bit, I think I presented this chart before. It really shows the growth projections of housing units in Howard County. So currently, about 50% of all homes in the county are single family detached, and 23% are townhomes, and 26% or 7% is single family detached. And based on our zoning and based on our redevelopment estimates for places like downtown Columbia, not including Gateway because it's not an approved plan yet, but once Gateway is approved, we definitely need to take that into consideration and plan for schools in Gateway. But it's really based on existing zoning in the county and existing approvals. We track what's permitted, what's being under construction. We track the recorded unbuilt. We track plans and process, and we track future potential through undeveloped land. So the future, based on zoning, about 60% of all future units will be apartments. That's our estimate. 27% single family detached and 13% townhomes. So at the end result, assuming current zoning, the percentage of single family homes decreases a little bit, and apartments increase from 26% to 31%. So the trend is we're moving towards more apartments, less single family detached and attached based on zoning. So this chart shows that the number of units in the Housing Commission survey in 2021, it's about 80% of all of the apartments in the county, because it's a survey, but it's a very comprehensive survey. 80% is a very high level. And they classify their apartments between garden apartments, high-rise elevator, and mid-rise elevator. And I think I'm going to go skip. Oh, here it is right there. So, so garden apartments are walk-up, non-elevator buildings, typically 2 or 3 stories, but sometimes up to 4 stories. So some of the older apartment units, like in Columbia, you might have sort of those outdoor stairways that could be up to 4 stories, but typically garden apartments are, walk-up, non-elevator, 2 to 3 stories. Mid-rise apartments are elevator served up to 8 stories. Now in Howard County, this is the way the Housing Commission defines it. We don't have many 8-story elevators. Typically, like if you think of downtown Columbia, those are 5 stories, retail on the first floor, and then 4 stories of residential. And same with some of the new units along the Route 1 corridor. You would have 4-story residential with served by elevator. So if they're elevator served up to 8 stories, that's this classification, mid-rise apartments. And you can see the number that are existing, or at least the number that were in the survey of the 80%. There's about 4,600 compared to most of the apartments, the older style that were built, beginning in the 50s, 60s, 70s, et cetera, are the garden style. And that's, 17,600 of those. Not too many high-rise elevators, which are 9 stories or above. Those are some of those tall buildings in downtown Columbia. So the number of units in the housing survey that include those is a very small percentage. So this is just something to keep in mind. We don't have a lot of high-rise elevator in Howard County. And what's being built currently is mostly this mid-rise elevator, although there still are the garden type being built as well. And if you look at the student yields by those housing unit types, the highest yield is the garden. And that's typically because a lot of the garden style apartments, there might be a higher proportion of 2 and 3 bedroom units compared to the mid-rise elevator. For example, if you think of downtown Columbia, there's a lot of studio 1 bedrooms and some 2 bedrooms, very few 3 bedrooms. So the mid-rise elevator, they're mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, as opposed to some of the gardens, particularly the older ones, you could have up 2 or 3 bedrooms. So that's why the yields could be typically higher. But the yields are relatively low for mid-rise at 0.158, and then high-rise is about the same. And again, we don't have many of those, and there's not expected to be many built moving forward. And of all types, the average is 0.325. And what this looks at, this is
there?
Yeah, go ahead, Todd. Yeah.
And Laura, you might have an answer to this, but is there any movement toward owned mid and high rise multifamily as opposed to rented?
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier today in a meeting to try to focus on home ownership as opposed to rental. The problem that you run into is financing, because currently there really isn't a vehicle to finance buildings where it's home ownership, where it's commercial on the bottom and residential on the top. There just isn't a lot of financing out there for that kind of construction. That's why you end up with rentals on the top when it's commercial on the bottom. So one of the things that we had asked about Gateway today in our Howard County legislative meeting was to try to rethink how you put that commercial into those spaces and not make it specifically commercial on the bottom, residential on the top, because every time you do that, you're stuck with apartments because there's no financing for ownership in that, when you do it that way.
Are there any now, Jeff, that are owned multifamily mid and high rise?
Well, so
there are a few in Columbia, right?
Yeah, so this survey,
not with commercial on the bottom.
Yeah,
right, because that's a different kind of unit, and the owner has to be looking for cash flow, and then you got cash flow and sold in the same building, and I get it.
Well, and this data it's a Housing Commission's rental housing survey, so it's all rental.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah, so this is their rental housing survey. There are definitely condo apartments in Howard County. Those are included in the, the previous data in terms of average yields. It includes the condo apartment style, but this particular data set is just for rentals. So what this shows is, so this is the countywide for all housing units type, about 0.5. And this is a selection of all of the mid and high-rise apartments in the survey. So this lists them all by name. And it's just interesting to see that some of the new mid-rise apartments, like the Metropolitan in downtown Columbia, 10Ms in downtown Columbia, Juniper, have very low yields. And you can see it increase over time. I don't know all of these really by, I don't know these in detail, but you can some of these older apartment buildings like Harper House might be high rise, for example, but you can see the yields over time. But most of the newer buildings being built, the yields are relatively low. Although Patuxent Square, I think, was recently built, and you can see the yield for that is pretty high. So again, you'd have to look at the unit mix in these units as well.
And
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Are any of these low-income housing tax credit deals, which would change the character of?
Yeah, I think some might be, yes. Yeah.
What you'd expect to see, because some of those would be a much lower price point and a much higher bedroom count, which you might expect to deliver more students.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think if the low income housing is intended to be family housing, then the bedroom count would be on average higher for sure. Yeah.
Right.
And so, for example, the average bedrooms per unit, this is the same. So the order of these, this is the same. So the order of these, if you kind of mentally can put your head around, this is the order of the yields. Kind of remember the yields as it goes up from left to right. And then this is bedrooms per unit. So you sort of get this increasing trend with bedrooms per unit. The next slide shows it a little bit differently as well. But you can see some of these units in Columbia, for example, it's 1.35 bedrooms per unit on average, as opposed to something like Penniman Park and Patuxent Square, the units are higher. So that's an example of, so you would expect the yields to be higher for those units as well. And again, this does not include garden apartments. This is just the mid-rise and the high-rise types of units. So generally, what this is saying is that the typical new mid-rise apartments, the average bedrooms per unit are not as great as the garden apartments of old. So if you're thinking that future building in Howard County, if it's going to be more of the mid-rise elevator type units with lower bedroom counts, then the yields coming out of those you would expect to be less. That's not to say that there can't be some apartment units with 3-bedroom units to serve, families in the future as well. I'm just kind of pointing out current trends the last 10 years or so. And this is multifamily.
Can I ask you, am I missing Roslyn Rise on there somewhere? I don't see Roslyn Rise on there anywhere.
Yeah, it's probably not, because it was more recently built, it might not have been captured.
Okay.
But I know what you're referring to. Yeah. I think, in fact, it had UNOs, but I didn't want to include student data because it was just leasing up at the time. So anyways, it would skew the results. So here's multifamily yields by rents. This includes all apartments in the survey, including garden apartments. And you can see this trend line, generally speaking, the greater the rent, the smaller the yield. And that, also relates to the trends of the new construction in downtown Columbia, for example, where the rents are higher for, 1-bedroom studio apartments, and maybe some 2 bedrooms. And then this is multifamily years by year, but there's less of a correlation between lower yields if it's built more recently, but that trend is somewhat apparent moving forward. So then we took a look at single family detached and single family attached yields. So what this chart shows is that homes built by decade and the 2023 school year yields. So if you're living it, so homes that were built, for example, between 1971 and 1980 in the decade of the 70s, as of 2023, the average yield in those homes built in that decade were 0.44, which is less than the overall yield for SFDs of 0.54. And then the more recent units that were built, the higher the yield is. And in fact, the yield for units after 2010, all units constructed after 2010, and I have a chart in the next chart that shows the amount of these units, how many units are actually built, is averages 1. And this makes intuitive sense. I mean, typically, if you have new construction, that's when you have families moving into new housing, new families who want to maybe move into a larger house because they have new children coming or already in the school system to expand.
But this goes to I think, Brett, your point earlier. So is the school system using, and I don't know if Tim's still here, but does the school system use the overall average of 0.54? Or does the school system use 1.0 because they're new houses in new developments?
So yeah, so what the school system does, they and Tim, I don't know, is Tim here? Yeah, probably. So they look at, they do have a yield for new construction, and the yield for new construction is higher than the average yield. So they do apply, and DPZ. So we give the school system at the end of every year projections of housing units built based on what we know is in the pipeline and based on the zoning into the future. So we give them projections every year by unit type, by location, very detailed, so they can get it by school district and by school polygon actually. And they apply, they have a new construction yield by unit type, by school district. So by elementary school. So they have lots of yields, because it might be that you have new construction in one school district is yielding different than another school district. So they look at empirical data of new construction yields. They don't look at the overall average yield. And they also look at and this was discussed earlier, they look at the yield for resales. So they, based on empirical data, they know what the typical yield is for resale as well. And we know that the number of new units being built in the county is not that great compared to the amount of units that are being resold. So there's somewhere between 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 units being sold, depending on the market, every year in Howard County. New families moving in, other families moving out. And there's typically, as far as single family detached, I think last year there was like only 300 single family detached homes built. So there's a lot more resales than there are new single family detached homes being constructed. So yes, the new homes, as it shows, have higher yields. However, there's a lot of resales happening, and there's also a trend of new families moving into resales after empty nesters move out.
So is there any trend when you're looking at these 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s and 80s homes, let's say, because there's still a decent quantity of those? Is there a trend toward a higher yield as retirees and empty nesters are selling those houses and leaving them behind?
Yeah, that's a good question, because what this shows is a snapshot in 2023, what the yield is. Yeah. Didn't look at that particular question, but that's something we can maybe try to look at.
And something for you to think about is that inventory has been dropping. And on average right now in Howard County, only about 300 or so houses are resale every month, where Normally, in a normal market, that would probably be closer to 1,000 or 1,100. So for the last 3 or 4 years, the number of homes that have been sold in Howard County are well below historic average. So
Right.
if you're factoring that in, what we're living through right now is well below
Right.
what it normally would be.
Yeah, and that report, the report sort of alludes to that as well. It's a really important point. And as a real estate professional, you would see this firsthand for sure. That, you know, the mortgage rates, right? So people that are locked into 2.5%, 3.5% mortgage rates in a single family detached, let's say that they're empty nesters, they may not necessarily want to move into a new home because they don't want to give up that low mortgage rate now that rates have risen to 6 or 7%. So the question is, how long would that last? So yeah, the resales are slowing down considerably. But you know, 300 resales a month, that's still, is that SFDs or townhomes or both?
No, that's every type of home. So like
So-
last month in Howard County, across all kinds of properties, I think we had a total of 332 sales last month.
Yeah, so that's like 3,600 a year. So that's low because I think in the past we've gotten between, you know, 4,000 or 5,000. I think you mentioned 1,000 a month, so a lot more. But the 3,600 is still relative, is still compared to you know, I think all told we typically build between 500 and 1,000 units per year lately. Over the last 20 years, it averaged about 1,500, but things are slowing down. So the last few years, it's the 500 to 1,000 range. So that relative to the 3,600 homes is still, you know, less.
Jeff,
I have
do
a
you have any data on those older home sales, on number of students coming from those older homes once they transfer to a new owner?
So we do. Well, so that's coming up, I think. I
Okay,
have
all right.
something related to what you're saying. Yeah. So was there another question?
Lisa.
If you're
Lisa.
going to talk about yields for types of homes within that resale category, that was a question I was going to have, but I'll wait if you're going to address that.
Yes, so basically we look at, we also have the same thing for SFAs. So this is for SFDs. This chart, and I have a similar chart for SFAs, which I'll be showing in a second. Does that address your?
Well, no, because I think what your average person, when you say resale and the effect on school capacity, and you're talking about older people without children, resell to younger people who have children, you're looking at older homes than what is part of the category of students from resales are not just all older homes, right? We've got a big range of homes within resales. We've kind of confirmed with Mr. Rogers that, 2-year up is a resale.
Right.
And so it would be great to get some information. I know it might be hard and not even possible to like say, okay, within these ages of homes, what are those yields? Because I'm sure they vary wildly.
Right,
Thanks.
right. Yeah. But I do have some trends at the end that might address that question, I think, maybe. But I know what you're saying. That would be a good point to try to look at that in more detail. So what this shows is the number of units built by decade. And, there was a lot of units built in the 80s and 90s when we had a lot of growth in Howard County. In fact, that's when AFTL began in 1992 because of this large amount of homes built. And then this is the number of students living in those homes, which you'd expect to, the greater the number of homes. These are SFD units, by the way, SFD homes. And then the homes built from 2001 to 2010 were 6,600, and then slowing down to 5,300 in the last 13 years. And you can see the yields. This is the 1-to-1 about, so this chart shows an average yield of 1 person per house. So really, this is one way to look at this. Every single family detached home built after 2010 has an average 1 student living in it. And the yields are less
Right.
for the 2023 school year. Before the ratios are less, so thus the yields are less for homes built in previous decades. And this again makes intuitive sense. A family might have purchased a home in the 80s, and then their children went through the school system. And so now there's no children living at home. But of course, the home can be resold, and this would include that resale as well, new families moving in. So this is the same information by single family attached or townhomes. The trend isn't quite as apparent. The yield's about the same as the overall average yield is 0.51 for townhomes compared to 0.54 for single family detached. And the yields are higher for more newly built townhomes, but they're also higher than the average for some reason for townhomes built in the 70s. So it's not quite as a similar trend as SFDs. It's a little bit more, changes from one decade to the next. And this is the number of townhomes built by decade. And you can see again, the 80s and the 90s quite a bit. And then a fair amount after 2010, as SFTs have slowed down, townhomes have increased in relative terms. And this is SFDs by assessed value. So the higher the assessed value, typically the yields increase. So for homes that are assessed between 500,000 and 600,000, single family detached homes that have that assessed value, the yield is about the countywide average of 0.54. And then the higher the assessed value, the higher the yields increase. And then it actually drops for very expensive homes over $1 million. And again, this is the data, the number of homes built that are at that assessed level. So the number of single family detached homes that are valued between 400 and 500,000 is the greatest at 15,000. So you can see at the lower end, there's more single family detached homes. These are homes that were built decades ago. And then as the more recently built homes, the more expensive they are. And there's less of them. Same thing for townhomes. As assessed value increases, you sort of get actually a decline in yield as well, but it's more pronounced than the single family detached. And then the number of townhomes by assessed value built in the county as of 2023. Most townhomes are assessed between 300 and 400,000. And then the newer townhomes that are built are, more expensive, but there's less of them, similar to single family detached. So this is sort of the life cycle or trend data I was referring to. And what it looks at is for SFDs, and we have a similar one for SFAs. So it looks at in the 2023 school year, so to take a snapshot of the latest school year, what were the average yields for homes based on year sold? So the peak, it ends up being, you got to get this bell curve for homes that were sold about 7 or 8 years ago. The yields are the highest. So what this is saying, I think, is that a family moves into a resale house, and this could be a new house too at the time. They move into a house, and they might, let's just say it's a married couple with no kids, so the yields are 0. But then over time they have children, and so 7 years down the road, the yields are now 0.91. So basically, you have a resold house or even a new house that is sold, and it takes about 7 years or 8 years for the peak yield to occur. So basically, there's a lag. Resales do create new students, but not necessarily right away, I guess is what this is saying. So I don't know what the conclusion is, but it just shows the life cycle of what works in the county. And again, Montgomery County had a very similar sort of bell curve when they looked at this as well. And the same thing occurs for townhomes for the most part. There's a bell curve, and the yields are highest for homes that were sold, 7, 8, 9 years ago, higher than the average yield. And you can see, townhomes that were last sold in 1996, which means whoever lives there now lived there also in 1996. They moved in 1996. So you can imagine there's not very many children living in those homes because the kids have grown up and moved out. So this, this makes intuitive sense. But the peak to think about is it takes about 7, 8 years, and it's above the average starting years 3, 4, 5 after you're sold as well.
Jeff,
So how do you use this data? That's a good question. I don't know, but it just shows you the trends of what's happening in the county.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I know a lot of this is based on number of houses and all that stuff, but is there any graph or chart, and maybe you've showed it already and I'm just brain dead, but that shows how the average age of the county has changed and where it is right now compared to all that? I mean, I feel like the average age in the county is increasing. Fewer young people, more older people. I mean, is there anywhere where you try to bring that into all this equation, or do you strictly look at, we built 5 single-family homes, we built 20 townhouses, so anywhere in there, are you bringing age into any of this?
So we do have data, from the census of average age, and you're right, the average age in the county is increasing and has been increasing over time. So, and then the numbers, and I can share that chart. I can send that out to the committee. The numbers of those that are, between the ages of 55 and 65 has been increasing, has continued to increase. The numbers between 65 and 75 is increasing. The baby boomers. So the aging of the population nationally, that's also happening in Howard County. So yes, as the population ages, there's probably propensity to have less, the yields not being as high, and we're showing that a little bit. The yields have decreased.
Yeah,
But
so do you feel like that is just showing up in here and that's just how it shows up, but we don't really particularly track that and try to, mesh that in with these numbers?
Well, I mean, the average age is increasing in the county, but if you remember the first few charts, the yield per housing unit is pretty consistent over the last 10 years, except post-COVID, it's dropped down from 0.5 to like 0.45 or something like that. So I don't think that has to do with the aging of the population. So yes, the population is aging, but the average yields in the county isn't dropping significantly, really, at least the last 10 years. Now in the future, it might, but yeah.
Well, I sort of think maybe in some ways it might, because, it's probably going to be, as you say, younger families that are buying single family homes. I mean, I just don't have too many clients who are in their 60s and 70s and saying, oh, let me go out there and buy that, 5,000 square foot, $1.5 million new home. I
Right.
mean, most of those do tend to be couples with kids age. So I do feel like if somehow age should be a factor in some of this, and I don't really see where that's addressed.
Well, Jeff,
mean,
didn't you provide that? I think you provided that last year to spending affordability, and what as it
we have
relates,
that chart,
as it relates specifically to what we're talking about here with schools. One of the surprising things was the Census Bureau projection for school-age children in the county, 5 to 18, wasn't projected to change at all in the next 20 years.
Right.
Just static, same number,
Right.
which was a bit of a shock, actually.
Yeah.
To the Spending Affordability Committee, I know, but I don't know if you're still seeing that.
Well, so I'm trying to. So the state MDP, Maryland Department of Planning, has a cohort model, and the Baltimore Metropolitan Council also has a cohort model. That's where that came from. So basically, we give them our housing projections and our population projections. They kind of run it through their cohort model. However, I'm waiting for them to update it because based on the 2020 census and birth rates, they have to make major significant adjustments to that. So I think with the birth rates trend change, that might show a change in the future, where the number of 5 to 18-year-olds actually decreases in the future. We are seeing a decline in birth rates. Tim alluded to that, and that's one reason why the number of students are projected to remain flat, I think, is because the birth rates have declined. So, yeah, all that takes, you got to factor all that, the aging of the population, birth rates.
We
in
had
terms
this
of-
conversation regarding the latest census reports that have come out. And yes, birth rates are going down, but also immigration is going up. So it's counterbalancing items in this equation.
And to me, I think it's more important, the housing stock is more important, because if there's a single family detached home in the county with 4 bedrooms, eventually that's going to be sold, most likely to a family, because they're going to want to make use of those bedrooms, right? So it's just a question of timing. I don't really see the yield dropping in Howard County because of the housing stock is fixed. You have so many single family detached, so many townhomes with 2 or 3 bedrooms, maybe even sometimes 4 bedrooms. Over time, we're going to be building more apartments, so the future growth of students might slow because of the growth of the housing stock is changing more towards apartments. But there's still a lot of single family detached and townhomes. It's just a question of timing. When are those homes going to turn over for new families? And that occurs in different neighborhoods at different times. And that's obviously very difficult to predict. But Tim does a good job at looking at resales and to try to track those trends in different neighborhoods. You have some neighborhoods that the schools are growing in enrollment, but there's no new housing being constructed. And that's because you might have several, a majority single family detached homes that are turning over. It could have been in the 80s, it was very crowded, and then it has been crowded. And now new families are moving in, so it's crowded again.
Right. I think a good example of that is probably Dunlogan.
Mm-hmm.
You got a lot of
Yeah.
older people in Dunlogan who are moving out and families are coming in, which might be part of what's causing the problem over there. And I think you said the middle school, but that's a neighborhood where you really see that happening.
Yeah, so a lot of this is anecdotal evidence is really important. And then the big question is, how long will it take for the whole mortgage situation to work itself out? If rates are 6.5% now, they were 7+, but you still have many homeowners with 4%, 3% mortgage rates. What's the timing of that? Like, it's very hard to predict. When are people going to be, when are they going to be willing to move? And of course, people move for all sorts of reasons, not just because of mortgage rates, but that has a big impact at this point, I think.
Hey, Jeff, before
Yeah.
you move forward, you mentioned some lagging for the single family detached and some of the units. You said that was about a 7 to 9 year lag for the resold homes.
Yeah. Right. So I guess what I was trying to say was that, so if a home was sold, according to the data in 2023, the yields are 0.33. So basically the home sold and the child goes to the school that very year. And if somebody's living in a home in 2022 that was sold a year ago, 2022, the yield is 0.55 in the 2023 school year. So basically, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, the peak is 0.91. So a family moving into a home in 2016 currently would result in the highest number of students living in that home on average.
And this doesn't distinguish between new homes and resales.
Right. So this would include all homes, right?
Yep.
Yeah. It could be a new home that was built in 2016 and a home that was built back in 1997, but resold in 2016. Yeah. So
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you.
I think that's near the end. I think we're at the end. Yeah. Oh, so this is just this is Tim. I didn't realize Tim was going to show this. The point of this is to basically say that given these trends, particularly what I showed here with this post-COVID, we're seeing this sort of situation now. It was interesting to hear Tim. The official enrollments come out September 30th of each year, so we don't know what they are for 2024. But I think he mentioned that the enrollment might be lower than they had anticipated, and that's somewhat surprising to me because I keep thinking that at some point things need to bounce back, but they're not, and so they're projecting, flat moving forward, and so we'll just have to keep watch every year and see what the trends end up being. But this is a real dramatic change compared to just the recent past. The last 5 years ago, we were expecting the county to continue to grow, and I think in large part that has to do with birth rates and trends of people going to homeschooling and private schools, and also the number of homes being built in the county is a lot less than it used to be, and it's projected to slow down moving forward as well. And we give the school system our housing data every year, projections of new units, so that might be reflected in this change as well. And then this is on the very front of the report. This is a summary of conclusions. There's just 2 more slides left. And I won't read through these, but basically this sort of is kind of high level conclusions of the report, which we talked about during the presentation.
Anybody, any last minute questions or thoughts to run by Jeff?
I
A lot of-
apologize. I tend to go on, but we've been discussing this for a decade. Thank you, Jeff, for providing a mandatory report that's in the general plan, and I'm sure we'll see others coming up in the near future. But I do need to remind everyone, some of these factors, cost shift between new construction and old construction, it's an age-old debate. But ultimately, our tasking is to find out how to make sure we have adequate public facilities, in our case, or in the case I tend to champion for schools, although it can apply to other things. And it should be independent of what the student yield is. In other words, if the yield goes up 0.1 or 0.2 or goes down 0.1 or 0.2, depending on demographics, our APFO needs to be robust enough to ensure we have adequate public schools all across the county as well as locally as we go forward. So some of these numbers and factors will be critical, and some are superfluous. I actually use that word. And that is our tasking. So let's figure out how to get the math right to make sure that we aren't putting kids in trailers in the near future or long-term future. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, I will tell you from a real estate perspective, and I've been selling real estate in Howard County 23 years, going on 24 soon. All, based in Howard County that whole time. And somewhere in here where it says basically 2/3 of the houses don't affect, this 2/3 of the units don't affect the schools at all. I will tell you, it's been that way ever since I've been a real estate agent in Howard County. The number of people who buy and sell houses that are affected by schools is usually only about 1/3 of the people who buy and sell in Howard County.
Yeah, I think that's one of the valuable things of this report, because it shows really the consistency of yields over time. And what you just said, it's not like people are rushing to Howard County all of a sudden to go to school. It's really been consistent over time. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll go ahead and second that.
All in favor, just say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Any opposed? All right. See you next meeting. Look for emails with all of the information to prepare for the next one. But thanks, everybody. And Jeff, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.